it more than me, let them take it. And nobody ever stole a penny from me. Hmm? Billy sent me a text about 2 o'clock this afternoon saying he wasn't feeling well. And so I told him to find somebody else to teach class. And he wasn't able to find anybody else, so he called me back or texted me back about 3:30, and he said, I'm not going to be there, and you're it. And I wouldn't have done it except I get to take my mask off, and it's worth it to be able to do that. We have a couple of announcements. Church office will be closed tomorrow for Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to all our veterans. Uh, this up for the evening. That's Friday night before Thanksgiving, isn't it? That's the 19th. And you can sign up at the Family Life Center or contact church office. Sign up for that. Teens are having a game night this Friday at Davis's home. I'm not sure why I'm announcing that. There's no teens in here, but the Davises are here, so they're aware. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Y'all stay home Friday night. There'll be some people coming. Was there any other announcements? That's prayer request upcoming. Veronica Allsbrook will have hand surgery on Friday, so let's keep her in our prayers. And Rhonda and Ben Steele are at Rhonda's mother's home in Florida. Rhonda's mother had a fall and broke her pelvis, and so Rhonda tried to fly down there Sunday, and she couldn't get out of the airport. And so Ben drove her down on Monday and is still there. And he'll be back this week, but not sure when Rhonda's coming back. And Ray Cook was able to leave the hospital and is back in rehab around the corner, Laurel's on Pemberton. And so continue to pray for Ray and Ellie. Any other prayer requests? We really have a lot of prayer requests. Yep. Holden, whose cancer has returned. We typically have a elder Wednesday night, and we always pray, and we have a huge list. There's lots of people that are struggling, so keep those of our community that are struggling in your prayers. Dave's going to lead us in prayer.
Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for the time that we can come here tonight and study in Corinthians. And we're grateful that we have a place that we can come together and learn from one another and learn how to apply the word that we hear, and please help us to encourage each other and
typically don't like to get up in front of class and be very well prepared, and obviously I didn't get the opportunity to do that this afternoon, and a half I had to put in on this, but and so I don't know how long we'll go tonight. We may go very quickly. You don't have anything to say. Or we might go, as we normally do, just cover one of the two chapters we're supposed to cover. But we'll give it a go and see what happens. I'd like to back up a little bit to chapter 12. We're supposed to do 13 and 14 tonight. Chapter 13 is really a continuation of the thought in chapter 12. It begins, or chapter 12 ends, by saying, and I will show you a still more excellent way. And then he begins to talk in chapter 13, which is one of the better known chapters in the Bible about love. So I want to go back and focus on the gifts of the Spirit, which he talks about in 12. I don't remember us talking a lot about that last week. Now, I could be mistaken and just forgot about it, but I don't think we focused on it last week. And so let's read a couple of excerpts. Verse 4. There are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge according to the same Spirit. Prophecy. Various kinds of tongues. To another, the interpretation of tongues. All these are activated by one and the same Spirit, who allots to each one individually, just as the Spirit chooses. And then let's skip down to 27. Now you are a body of Christ and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then deeds of power, then gifts of healing, forms of assistance, forms of leadership, various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all possess gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? But strive for the greater gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. You know, well, first of all, these are not the only list of the gifts. Romans, the 13th chapter, the 12th chapter, has a list of gifts. There's a place or two where there's an indication that there's a gift. Look back in the 7th chapter of Corinthians. A relationship of a husband and wife. This is verse 5. Of self-control. I wish found, but each has a particular gift of God, one having one kind and another. And so he indicates that self-control is the gift. So we have all of these lists. There's, like I said, Romans 12 has another list. How are we supposed to look at these gifts? How are we supposed to think about these lists? they exhaustive? Are they illustrative? And you think not exhaustive. Okay. Any other sort of ways? Okay. 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 Held accountable. Okay. Shirley said that whatever our gift is there any indication that we just get one? Do you know people that have lots of gifts? Many times the most talented seem to have a lot. And, what Shirley is asking as well, do we sort of look at ourselves against these lists and say, is the Spirit using me? Which is mine? Have you ever done that? Have thought about, I'm gifted? Any other ways we're supposed to think about these? Okay. Where do we get them from? You say God gives them to us. It says what? How do we get them? The Spirit gives as what? As He chooses. Spirit gives as He chooses. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Do you think everybody's got a gift? Does it? What it says is, and let's go back and take a little closer look. In verse 4 in chapter 12, now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are varieties of services, but the same Lord. There are varieties of activities. I think, is the NIV say works? Yeah. And so what we tend to do is divorce, I think, gifts from what? Services and activities. But here he says what? All of these are together. All of these are together. So, I think, tend to sort of say, well, if you do something big, that's a gift, It's got to be dramatic. It's got to be obvious. It's got to be, and the fact of the matter is what? Sometimes it's not a mighty rushing wind. It's a whisper. And does it say one gift's important or one service or one work is more important than the other? What do they all have in common? He doesn't talk about love here. He doesn't talk about love to the next chapter. So you can't say that to the next, you get to the next chapter. What? It's about what? Everything is for the common good. Everything is for the common good. But verse 7. manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. So what you have is what? These gifts, and they're certainly not exhaustive, but they're what? Examples of ways that people are gifted, people serve. And what we know is what? We're given these things by the Spirit. We're given them by the Spirit. And what? We're given for a specific purpose, for the uplifting, the edification of community of believers. Congregation. Or they might be doing things in very quiet, private ways. You know, I know people in this congregation that do a ton of things for others, and it's never mentioned publicly, ever. But yet, what? They're highly, highly gifted. Highly, highly gifted at contributing to the common good. So, that's what he says. Yeah.
I've got a question. At the end of 12,
Yep.
it says, now eagerly desire the greater gifts.
Mm-hmm. Well, does he indicate anywhere here where that one gift is better than another? What we're going to see is the Corinthians really, really liked what? They had one favorite gift. What was it? Speaking in tongues. Because when you get it, particularly in chapter 14, it's a whole lot about speaking in tongues. And so it's pretty obvious that they were big on tongues. And notice the way that 13 starts. By speak in tongues. And I don't think it's a happenstance that he started that chapter 13 that way, because they were really, really big into tongues. And it was causing all kinds of problems. But
He told them if you're speaking in a tongue and you don't have an interpreter,
and so, we'll get into that in a bit. But when he says, but strive for the greater gifts, and I will show you a still, I think he's referring to what is going to follow there. That there's better than, actually what? Better than all the gifts. Now, he uses the word gifts there, and I really didn't have time to go into looking up the exact word he uses there. And I don't know if it's the same exact word that he uses before for the gifts. And it may be a more general word that he uses there. I'd have to research that. I really don't know. Anybody want to comment on that? Okay. Then he gets into chapter 13. And I will show you a still more excellent way. If I speak in tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all And if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends, but as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. For knowledge, it will come to an end. We know only prophesy only in part, but will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now then we will see. I know in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. Okay, like I said before, one of the best known chapters in the Bible. It's a very short chapter. The literary form it's in is called an encomium, and it has 3 parts, actually 4 parts, because I should have read the first part of the first verse of chapter 14. Typically, that's considered the ending of what we just read. Pursue love and strive for the spiritual gifts. It has, like I said, 4 parts. An introduction or a prologue is verses 1 to 3. Verses 1 to 3. And then it has a piece that really tells us what love does and what it's about. That's 4 to 7. And then it compares and contrasts love to the other virtues, 8 to 13. And then verse 14:1a, chapter 14, verse 1a, is what? An appeal for emulation to do these things. So it's got 4 distinct parts, and let's take each one and discuss it. If I speak in tongues and angels, but do not have love, I am always a gong or a clanging cymbal. Prophetic powers, all mysteries and all knowledge. Have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Okay, well, when you look at that, what comes to mind? You have. None? My brain is empty.
Close. It's not what you do, it's why you do it.
Okay.
Motivation.
Okay. That it has to be motivated by love, whatever you do. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Okay. Notice that it's in first person. I think when we read that chapter, we forget that Paul's writing a letter to these people. He's writing a letter to this church. He says what? If I speak in tongues. Did Paul speak in tongues? He says in the next chapter what? I speak in tongues way more than all of y'all do. Says it in chapter 4. And in the book of 1 Corinthians, he frequently uses himself as what? An example. Frequently uses himself as an example. And so this is personal. If I, and what? They look up to Paul, huh? They ought to look up to him. If I speak in the tongue that do not have love, is a gong or clanging cymbal. And if I have to understand all the mysteries and all the knowledge, and if I have all these great things, weigh everything I have, offer my life, and I don't have love. Now, it says what? So that I may boast. But do not have love, I gain nothing. I gain nothing. So he's using himself, and you can think about the relationship and their relationship to Paul and what they would have thought about him. Here's somebody that's important, that's writing to us and what? Saying, pretty sharp guy. Some good stuff. But if I don't have the proper motive, I don't have the proper reason for what? It's nothing. It's nothing. See? Yeah. So, he's, look what I can do. It's pretty great stuff. Melissa? Okay. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but this is later in the notes. But a lot of times people read this at weddings. It's a very common thing, and it's not a bad thing at all. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that's a bad thing. But is this love about here the same type of love that you would have in a romantic? That, I am infatuated by this young woman and admire her and so forth and so on. Ross? Okay. Okay? Mm, okay. Yeah. Yeah. What love is he talking about? What did it say in 1 John? God loves us. And what's the result of that? What's that, Catherine? Okay, it's unconditional. He loves us and we respond to that love. What happens? Okay. Okay. What else? And how does that take its expression? See, we become whole. God loves us, and what? We respond to that. We embrace that. And the expression is what? We love others. We love others. So an embedded thought in this, although he doesn't say it directly, is what? That love is not self-serving. What happens is what? It expresses itself by relation to other people. You know, you can't, the love he's talking about here is what? Something you can't capture. Something you can't possess. It's got to be what? Between people. Got to be between people. It's not self-serving, which he goes on to say in the next section. So it's not a self-serving love, and it's a circular sort of notion that God loves us, and therefore what? We respond to that love by loving other people. Who are what? Our brothers and sisters. Now, think about it, talking about these things, about the Corinthians and what's going on there. You know, they're doing what? They're speaking in tongues and they're doing all of this stuff, but what? They don't love each other. They lack love. They have plenty of gifts, but they don't have love. And so that's his purpose of writing this. Okay, he goes on to say what? In the second section, let me say one other thing. In loving your fellow man, the love he's talking about here, you respond to God, you love. In securing them, what do you do as well? You secure yourself. It's a funny notion that shouldn't we look after ourselves first? No. You should what? You should love others, and in doing so, you take care of yourself. You take care of yourself. Okay, let's push on. Love is patient. Love is kind. And then he gets negative. He starts in a positive way, but then what? Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. And then he switches back to positive. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So he's given the characteristics, if you will, some in a negative way, some in a positive way, of what love does and how it operates. And notice those things. love is patient. What does it take to be patient? Well, it takes another person. It's not a one-way street. Think about those things as you go down that list. And invariably what? They involve somebody else. You know, we could sort of say, well, be kind, but that's sort of begging the question, isn't it? So forth and so on. But as you go down that list, it's what? It's a two-way street. These things involve others. And then he gets into the last part. Love never ends, but as for prophecy, end. As for tongues, they will cease. Is what? Only thing that's eternal. Now, how and he what? Eventually, we'll understand that. And particularly when we get down to the end of this. Now, faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. Now, does that mean faith and hope aren't forever? Now, he doesn't say it specifically, but is that the message? Yeah. Why, Rod? See, faith is what? In the Greek, it's the same word as what? Belief. Yeah. That's what he's talking about when he talks about what? When I'm growing up and eventually I'll be an adult or what? I'm looking into a mirror and it's not easy to see, but pretty soon it's going to become crystal clear. He's talking about what? When we realize we're no longer going to need faith and we're no longer going to need hope. It's going to be a reality. But what? Love endures. Love is permanent. Why? God is love. It will be here forever. It will be here forever. And then finally, he says what? The greatest of these is love. Pursue love and strive for the spiritual gifts. Pursue love and strive for the spiritual gifts. So he's calling us to emulate what he just said. Okay, any comments? Yeah, Bill. Well, I think about the knowledge of men. I think he's talking about, wisdom and knowledge and in this realm. And, when God takes us home, our knowledge is what? Incomplete. We think we know. And I think that's what the reference is there about that will pass away. It will become a different form. What's that? Yeah. More complete knowledge of God and what he desires. Okay. Any other comments before we chapter 14? Okay, notice in chapter 14. Okay, go ahead. I knew you'd work singing in here somehow. these. Yeah. Mm. Do you want Jack and I to lead it right now? And rightly so, huh, Jack?
Hey, this tenor is going to take your birthday present back.
Notice how chapter 14 begins with and ends with the same thing. Pursue love and strive for the spiritual gifts, and especially that you may prophesy. Now look down at the end, verse 4, actually 39. And speaking in tongues. All things should be done decently and in order. So he begins and ends it with this notion of prophesying in our terminology teaching. And obviously, we're having a problem with speaking in tongues. But notice that what Paul does here is he doesn't denigrate speaking in tongues, but he's putting it in its proper place. He's very careful not to denigrate it, but he's making it very, very clear that what, as Dana said earlier, if you don't interpret it, let's not do it. And he's talking about what he says. One reason is because what, you don't engage the mind. You don't engage the mind. And so he's one of the notions to integrate in our worship what? The mind with the spirit. To integrate those two. And he said just speaking in tongues doesn't do it. That doesn't cut it. If you can't do it, don't do it. Okay. Yes. And what? Do all things for the common good. If you go back to chapter 8, he sort of introduced the idea, and which is not unlike many of Paul's writings. Verse 3. Puffs up, the love builds up at the end of verse 1. Anyone who claims to know something does not yet have the necessary knowledge, but anyone who loves God is. And some translations say God is loved by him. So it's up on this theme of love back there, and what? Edification. The upbuilding of the body. And really that's the theme here. Pursue love and strive for spiritual gifts, and especially that you may prophesy. For those who speak in a tongue, do not speak to the people, but to God. For no them, since they are speaking mysteries in the Spirit. On the other hand, those who prophesy speak to people for their upbuilding and encouragement, consolation. So this notion of upbuilding and encouragement is the purpose of these gifts for the common good. And if you're not using it for the common good, then what? He says, don't use it. And it's clear that some people in the congregation were using it for their own enhancement. What's that?
Look what I can do.
Yeah. They were enhancing their own status, and what? Paul says you got to use it for the good. And then this sort of integration of mind and spirit for that big time. Down in verse anybody want to comment on that? Yeah, I'll give you my interpretation of it. I think it was a specific think of the word command is what comes to mind, but that's not exactly what I'm going to say. Statement by Paul about this situation. When it gives scholars all sorts of trouble, but when you go back, for example, to the 11th chapter, it indicates what? Women are praying. It says men are praying, women are praying. Women are cover their head. And many times we'll say, well, that they were praying in isolation in their own house. It doesn't make sense putting something on your head if that's true. It just doesn't make sense. And we know that what? Women were quite active in the church in the New Testament. And this thing about, well, shut up, keep your mouth shut, there's your place, sit down. I think it was specific because they were in. Yes. And, that's my interpretation. That's my interpretation. I don't think it's a universal rule. Now, it talks there about what? It says in other places in the Bible, women should be subject to their husband. But it also says what? What's that? It says husbands submissive to the wives. Yeah. 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 It's a difficult topic, and particularly what? Given the differences in society in 2,000 years ago and today. Melissa? Well, typically when they use the word, if they're referring to the Old Testament, they use the law and the prophets. What's that?
Capital L law.
In your, yeah. But in most of the time in the New Testament, when he refers to the law, and just the law, not the law and the prophets, he's talking about the law of God. So, once again, it's difficult for us in terms of interpretation. And like I said, Billy texted me at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and so I'm not prepared to definitively say whether that's law or law and the prophets. It's a murky subject. As Mike said, it's time to end the class. Huh? Last comment? Okay. Yeah. Thank you for your comments.